Good evening and welcome to the second event of the Palestinian Return Centre's annual Return Week. This evening's panel discussion is entitled Building a Global Movement for Palestine, International Solidarity. My name is Farah Kotene and I will be chairing this evening's online panel on behalf of the Palestinian Return Centre. أهلا وسهلا بكم في أسبوع العودة الذي يستضيفه مركز العودة الفلسطيني في لندن. This panel discussion will be focusing on different causes for justice around the globe, the intersections of those struggles and causes with Palestine, and ways in which we can mobilize for all together. The Palestinian cause is one that is deeply intertwined and interconnected to all struggles around the world, seeking decolonization, liberation, equality, and justice. This event will delve into struggles around the globe that have always stood firm in their solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. From the Irish struggle for civil rights in United Ireland, to the Native American struggle for decolonization and justice, to the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, to the Cuban solidarity movement that is still resisting brutal American imperialism. Without further ado, let's introduce our first speaker on this evening's panel, Mark Ayesh. Mark Ayesh is the author of A Hermeneutics of Violence, published in 2019. He was born and raised in Silwan, Jerusalem, before immigrating to Canada, where he is now an associate professor of sociology at Mount Royal University. He is currently writing a book on settler colonial sovereignty in Palestine. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Farah. It's a pleasure to be here again and to share this panel with the distinguished speakers, and I very much look forward to listening to what they have to say today. First of all, I'd like to mention that I am speaking to you today from the homeland of the Nitzitapi, the Black Confederacy, which involves the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai, the Iahe Nakota, and the Tsuut'ina nations. Otherwise, this place is known as Calgary. So when we think about the theme that we have here today, building a global movement for Palestine, and the theme of international solidarity, the first thing that comes to my mind is how the Palestinian struggle sort of illuminates and shows some of the key problems of colonial modernity in perhaps more starker ways than other struggles. I often do sit there and wonder, why do other people become concerned with Palestine? Why do other people from who have never been to Palestine or even met a Palestinian, why do they care about Palestinian liberation and the suffering of Palestinians? I mean, I would hope the answer would be that people are naturally good or want to see justice and so on. But I'm afraid it's not that simple. So I often wonder, what is it about the Palestinian struggle that gives it this much attention? The famous Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish one time told an Israeli journalist that the reason why Palestinians get a lot of attention is because their oppressor is a famous historical figure, being Israel. But I think there may be some truth to that. But I do think that it's more than that. We're famous precisely because our struggle shows the deep-rooted structural problems that colonial modernity left behind. And there are so many of those that we can talk about, but I just want to focus on a couple here. One is the notion of racial hierarchy. Zionism and the Israeli state project is very much rooted in this notion, in this notion that comes to us from the age of colonial modernity, that human beings are divided into races, and that those races exist in a hierarchical structure. And there are superior races and inferior races. The superior races deserve freedom. They manifest, the highest ideals of human civilization, that they have rational knowledge, that they have all of these abilities to reach the sort of apex of human civilization and progress. And below them are all of the other races that lack all of those abilities and capabilities. And that should either be eliminated because they can never bring about civilization, or enslaved and colonized so that they can be brought along this path of civilization. And of course, all of this is absolute rubbish. And there's no real historical validity to it. But nonetheless, that way of thinking is still prominent in our world today. And it shows itself quite starkly in the case of Palestine, where the Israeli state and the Zionist ideology believes that Palestinian people are not real humans, that Palestinian liberation is not a worthy cause because it is somehow rooted in violence and bigotry and backwardness and savagery. And I think that Israel has been like this and has functioned on that way of thinking well before these right-wing government that we see today that more explicitly state those things. I mean, we can find these kinds of statements and ideas more bluntly and explicitly stated on the right wing of Israeli politics, which is the dominant strand of Israeli politics. But really, that form of thinking appears in just more subtle ways throughout the history of Israel. And Palestinians, because they have experienced this form of dehumanization, have always resisted Zionism and the Israeli state project on the grounds of anti-colonization, on the grounds of anti-colonialism and anti-racism. This is not a new feature of Palestinian resistance. Since the 1910s and 1920s, Palestinians have been framing their struggle as an anti-colonial struggle, as an anti-racist struggle, as a struggle against that world of colonial modernity. And they continue to frame it in those ways to this day. This is the line that connects us to other struggles around the world, whether you're talking about indigenous struggles or Irish struggle or struggle against apartheid in South Africa, and many other struggles around the world. They all can see themselves in Palestinian suffering. To me, that's what the connection is. That's what draws people to Palestine. When they hear stories of the oppression and suffering of Palestinians, they see themselves in those stories. They see their own life histories, their own trajectories, and more importantly, when they see Palestinian resistance, they see their own aspiration for liberation and freedom reflected back to them. Now, I'm not trying to say that there are no differences here between these different struggles and that, you know, there are different forms of oppression and ways in which colonial modernity sort of manifests in their lives. Those differences exist, of course. But there is that fundamental sort of ground from which that kind of solidarity builds and emerges, where people across the world, again, they understand that Palestinian liberation means more than just liberation for Palestinians. It means liberation for so many of us who are aspiring for a different world. And that's the point that I just want to start off with and highlight as my opening comment. So I'll just end it here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for your input so diligently and eloquently put. I remember recently it's being shared online that people's support for Palestine is often a litmus test to see kind of where their morality lies on a lot of other causes too, which I think was relevant to your opening speech there. For everyone tuning in, if you do have any questions you would like our speakers to answer, please do comment them in the comments on the Facebook and YouTube live stream, and hopefully our speakers can answer them at the end, depending on how much time we have. So I'd just like to introduce our second speaker of the evening, and that is Bernadette Devlin McCalliskey. Bernadette is a lifelong human rights and social justice campaigner whose activities range from neighborhood organizing through to national protest movements and parliamentary representation. Bernadette came of political age as a working-class Catholic in 1960s Northern Ireland, rising to prominence in the non-violent campaign for Catholic civil rights in British-controlled Ulster. She was elected to the House of Commons in 1969 on a civil rights ticket, making her the youngest ever female MP at 21 years old. Over the next decades, inside and out of Parliament, Bernadette continued to agitate for equality in the north of Ireland. She is currently Chief Executive of the South Tyrone Empowerment Programme, STEP, and was involved in its founding in 1997. STEP is a community development organisation that works with migrants in the Dungannon area. Over to you, Bernadette. I think you're on mute, Bernadette.
Sorry about that, folks. I was just listening intently to Mark, and glad to follow. Good evening, everybody. I'm particularly struck by what Mark says. I think it resonates very much with the links between the struggle in Ireland and the struggle in Palestine. It is true that progressives, nationalists, Republicans, human rights activists in Ireland feel not only a political affinity with the cause of Palestine, but a deep emotional connection, notwithstanding the very, very clear differences in the depth and the intensity and in the suffering involved in both struggles. But historically, the conflict in Ireland, as indeed the conflict in Palestine and conflicts right across the world, have their roots in colonialization, have their roots in the building of empire, and much of that not solely part of the British expedition and building of the British Empire, but of the broad European project, which was responsible for genocide of many people historically in other nations, which was responsible, as I was taught at my father's knee, for the rape and plunder of Africa, for the destruction of South America, and for the genocide of the First Nation and native populations of other continents. So Palestine reminds us all of the longevity of our history, of the history of consequences. And I was struck particularly, when he put those three things together, that racial hierarchy, colonization, and that holistic understanding of freedom and liberation from oppression. And again, I think quite often forgotten in that mix is that imperialism and religion went hand in hand. God protected, white Christian gods protected the building of white European empires. And it's so embedded within the thinking of Western European culture that people don't even see it. They don't see it in terms of the interest, I think, between Ireland and Palestine as well, is that we living next door to England were the first people to be invaded, to be colonized, to have our language, to have our culture, to have our trade, to have our civilization eroded by the dictates of a foreign power. And I suppose up until now, when our neutrality is threatened by the government of the Irish Republic, we have had a long history of never being at war with a single country in the world other than England. And we would like to keep that tradition. But the Palestinian cause is as close to our hearts as our own. I think it's true as well to say that it's there's something about the state of Israel itself and the widespread anti-Semitism of Western Europe that found its conclusion in the Holocaust, and the historic guilt and denial of responsibilities. Very convenient to place all of the guilt historically of that on the German nation, but anti-Semitism was rife across Western Europe long before Hitler existed, and the denial of that reality and the denial of contribution to the Holocaust is almost as endemic in Western Europe as to allow Zionism, fascism, apartheid by a rogue state like Israel to get away with it on the basis that denies victim turned perpetrator and tries to build a continuity between anti-Semitism and the progressive movements that rightly oppose the behavior of the state of Israel. And yet it gets away with that. And I suppose in Ireland, we have an affinity with that as well because of the powerful nature of the British Empire throughout our own history. So there is a duty on all of us. And for the reasons Mark sets out, it's very easy. There is a duty on all of us to build a global movement around Palestine, because Palestine is a litmus test. It is, to my mind, the litmus test of solidarity. It is a litmus test of which side of the line you stand on, because it is not all right. It is not all right to justify the colonization, the destruction, the denial of the state of Palestine simply on the basis that in some ancient Christian text, some god worshipped by the British at that time or anybody else determined that group of people as a people should have some God-given right to displace other people, to kill other people's children, to annihilate an entire culture simply to build a supremacist state of their own. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is how across the globe do we challenge the strength? Because we understand how we connect with Palestine. How do we fight against what lets Israel get away with it? Because get away with it they do. The United Nations was created to ensure that something like the Holocaust never happened again, that world wars never happened again, but they do. They do, and right throughout the history of the United Nations, its single biggest disgrace has been its refusal to effectively sanction Israel. We see the United States, self-proclaimed protector of the universe, while it builds an arms trade and invades other people's countries. We look at the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we see that rightly condemned as it is. But there is no question then of if that is your attitude to Russia, why do you see the state of Israel as you do? We see here, within Ireland and Britain, a great movement that equates Zionism with anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, that creates opposition to the slaughter of innocents by the Israeli state as being anti-Semitism. And some way we have to challenge both this myth that to challenge Israel is to challenge Judaism, is to challenge the rights of Jewish people, is to stand in the line of Holocaust deniers. And we have to challenge these lies. And the only way we can do them is by building a global movement that from Palestine right across the globe understands the law of the consequences of colonization, colonialism, racism, and the denial of people's right to land. Because our, we all know where we belong, and we belong in different places. But where our feet and where our hearts are is where we belong. And historically, we know where our fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers and great-grandfathers came from. And that is our heritage and history. And our battle for equality, for human rights, for an end to being the oppressed, the second-class citizen, the landless. That's a universal struggle. And to my mind, if we can't build a global movement for Palestine, we can't save ourselves. We can't end colonialism, and we can't end that which has been created, developed, and strengthened by all of that, which is the race to control and dominate all the small nations of the earth. We're coming back round to that circle, the new imperialism of America, the attempt to globally dominate an institutional, violent takeover of what's left of the world's resources. So Palestine for us in Ireland, Palestine for me, is, as I say, the litmus test. If you can't understand, if you can't care, and if we can't link arms and put an end to the injustice that is the state of Israel's behavior in the attempt to analyze Palestine, we can't save the globe and we can't do anything. And I, for one, don't intend to go quietly into that dark night. And I would urge everybody to start where we are, dig where we stand, as we used to say in the 60s, and whatever else it is we are doing, Palestine is first and foremost in that international struggle. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Bernadette. Very powerfully put. I recently moved to Belfast, as you know, Belfast, Ireland, a few months ago, and it really warmed my heart to see just how wholehearted and staunch Irish solidarity is with Palestine. It's the point, every time I go out, I can't not see, a mural for Palestine or even just a Free Palestine poster in someone's living room window. The solidarity there is really, really heartwarming. Especially see as a Palestinian, and the parallels between the Irish and the Palestinian struggle are astonishing, and even the parallels of courageous women of the struggle like yourself, Bernadette, and like Ahetemimi, both defiant women in the face of such oppression, with slaps that were heard around the world. Thank you again, Bernadette. Our next speaker for this evening's event is Rebecca Miles. Rebecca is currently the Operations Director at the Potlatch Fund, a Native-led nonprofit organization that provides grants and leadership development to tribal nations in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. Rebecca grew up as a member of the Nez Perce tribe in Lapwai, Idaho. Although Rebecca left Lapwai, Idaho to go to school, first to get a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Washington State University, and then a master's degree in professional studies and organizational leadership from Gonzaga University, she returned to Lapwai, Idaho afterwards and has served her tribe and her local community ever since. Rebecca was the first woman to be selected as the Nez Perce tribal chairperson and served 2 terms. Over to you, Rebecca.
Still morning where I'm at in Lapwai, Idaho, but good evening to everybody. In my language, Himak is Kartiao Yao Inam Himuma Inam Lautua. Inam Hanuwat, as always, thank you to our creator. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you very much for the hosts for continuing this really powerful discussion. And I'm just quite honored to continue to be a part of the discussion. It's only been about a decade, and Mark really asked a really poignant question, is why do people care? And I often feel that way when I think about my activism within my own tribe. The Nez Perce tribe has, very similar. It's something I always believe in, is not comparing or competing of who had it worst in our struggle. I see that a lot of times in academia or others, of comparing, like, well, they can't compare this to what indigenous people went through in the United States because we lost, X amount, and it's always qualitative. I don't believe in comparing it in that way, because injustice is injustice. And I've spent my life fighting for the rights retained by our people in the Treaty of 1855. And the Treaty of 1855 essentially ceded over 13 million acres of land to the United States. In exchange, all our people asked for was to continue to live our way of life, to continue to speak our language, to practice the religion of our forefathers, and to be able to live free. And they will abide by every law, or pay the penalty pay the penalty. And that's not what happened. And so when I got involved in the Palestinian plight, it was really actually kind of by accident. I was writing a piece about our right to fisheries in the Columbia River, and our treaty right to fish in the usual and accustomed places that are written in that treaty. And our treaty is, you think about the United States Constitution, and if you look at how the Constitution protects treaties that the United States enters into, and you think about how the United States government treats treaties that they entered into with Indian tribes, it's amazing to see that that the treatment is not the same. And so having this interconnectedness, it is a struggle that I believe it's like linking our arms together. It's like being in the struggle together does matter. Because being in a long struggle, there's fatigue. I think of my ancestors and the fatigue. What happened after 1855? Gold was found on our reservation. And so what happened after that is the United States Cavalry refused. White people were not allowed to be on our reservation, but when gold was found on our reservation, they stepped back and said, we can't protect you, Nez Perce people, because there's just too many settlers coming in, and we don't know what to do. So what they did was enter into another treaty in 1863, just 8 years after the 1855 treaty was entered into. And so what happened is what you see is our Nez Perce people were forced to go into Canada, and that's where my people come from. I'm descended from Chief Looking Glass and Chief Whitebird, and they took over 800 Nez Perce to try to make it into Canada, to try to flee this country. When you think about all of the colonialism happening and what our previous speakers talked about, it's all based down to and what happens when, as a person that's only 10 years of understanding what's going on in Palestine, what's happening there, the establishment of the Israeli government. what you see that is it's beyond even Israel. It's all about resources. It's all about take those resources, as I just described, gold being found on our reservation. It's all about the who has control and power of those resources, and establishing some sort of formal government that will be in cooperation with you for those resources. It's being quid pro quo, finding people in that establishment that will enter into business as a colonized world sees business to be. And indigenous people across the world, around the world, don't see business in the same way, because we see the earth, we see the resources as our very identity. And that is what attracted me so much to the Palestinian plight, is because that is their identity. Just as much as our people, you cannot take us from the land. It's like you're taking who I am away from me. These are the lands of my forefathers. These are the lands my grandparents, great grandparents, and so gathered and continued our way of life. And so when you look at that that kind of what do you call it, the greediness, the taking of all the resources, its bottom line is it's down to resources. So how do we continue to continue this tiring long journey of because it gets to be fatigue. I've fought many political battles for the United States, our governmental system, and how bills work in our country, and you can get fatigue over the many visits you get in Congress, and meeting different senators, and asking for the same thing over and over and over and over again. And you can get to be very fatigued in a battle for the same thing, and then you got to find the energy to kind of continue that fight. And it takes more people to be attracted, and like I think was stated several times, is this litmus test, this morality on where we lie in what we think about these injustices. And by seeing a commonality with each other, by interlinking our arms together and sharing in the struggle, it actually gives us strength. It gives you strength when you get fatigued, you get very tired as an activist, because you're simply asking for the same thing over and over and over again, and trying to say it in a way that you hope that the people in power can understand what you're saying. And so that obviously gets very tiring. And so I think this interconnected struggle, continuing these discussions, are very key to our fitness, very key to our strength in continuing the battle, to continue the discussion and return Palestinians back to their land. I mean, it seems simple. I think of all we're asking for from the United States government is just to honor the treaty that they entered into with the Nez Perce people. It's very simple, and they're not giving us anything. In fact, we're just asking for the very small thing, in small retained rights, reserved rights, in exchange for over 13 million acres of land. That's all we're asking for, and to live in peace. And this colonialism has run deep on Indian reservations. It's you think about our survival, you think that it's amazing to me we've actually survived colonialism. And I'll put a plug in for this series I just watched on Amazon called The English. I don't know if anybody on the panel has seen it, and I'm a little biased, because the co-star in the series, one of them is Emily Blunt. She's a very famous actress, and she also produced the series. But the co-star in it is Cheske Spencer, who happens to be my cousin and was raised here where I'm from, in this little town of Lapwai, and did theater here in the Lapwai in local civic theater. But watching the English and hearing this discussion today just remind me so much of the history, the last 200-300 years of colonization, and this kind of lack of morality of opening up the West, and kind of this duty to annihilate the Indian people, and all this opportunity was just there for the taking. And I think in one of the series, um, they stated, God wouldn't have brought us here to this country if it wasn't meant for us to take, something to that effect. And so you think of that deep colonialism is still alive and well today. I know I've gone on and on and on. I just wanted to capture and really kind of, I think, more in a passionate way, talk about, or really share my belief in this interconnectedness, and kind of this theme about what we're recognizing right now, what we're recognizing in this panel, and how that and why that needs to continue. Somebody mentioned earlier about this global colonialism, and that, kind of how we battle that global global colonialism that's happened and been so destructive to Indigenous people across the globe. And sadly, and I think because everything revolves around the greed and the dollar, and resources, that unfortunately I feel Mother Nature is I hope that's not the case, but I feel like Mother Nature and what we call climate change is about the only thing that's strongly responding to that global colonialism. And I'll just leave it at that. And I look forward to hearing the next speaker. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca. Always incredibly insightful and powerfully said. And even just to add on to what you were saying about linking arms and this shared solidarity, I think sometimes when it comes to solidarities with different causes, we are sometimes too consumed in our own individual causes, and we don't actually realize, whilst we aren't linking arms, just how interconnected our oppression is, but also it isn't a coincidence that our oppressors are united whilst we aren't currently. It's no coincidence that the United States is probably the most staunchest ally of Israel, and isn't a coincidence that both of those states are settler colonies. And just wanted to also add that thank you again, Rebecca. It's an honor hosting and hearing from you again. We've hosted you a few times as a Palestinian Return Center, both you and Mark. And I'm always learning from you and in awe of your constant solidarity with Palestine. And I think some of the most powerful scenes of solidarity for Palestine were the images of Native Americans protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Stop Line 3 oil pipelines. And whilst they were protesting these pipelines, they were wearing Palestinian keffiyehs around their necks. They were waving the Palestinian flag, even whilst resisting your own struggle against brutal US settler colonialism. Your solidarity with indigenous peoples like Palestinians is still so steadfast and is still so staunch. It was very beautiful to see. Thank you again, Rebecca. Our next speaker is Bram Hanekom. Bram today is speaking on behalf of Africa for Palestine. Bram has been a lifelong activist for Palestine in South Africa. He has established himself as an activist for refugee rights, farm workers, and youth. He serves on the board of several NGOs and was previously the director of the human rights organization PASOP. PASSOP. He has been actively involved in solidarity organizations, campaigning for Cuba and human rights in Swaziland. His views, much like most in the Africa for Palestine movement, have been largely influenced by his life experience as a member of the family which fought against apartheid in South Africa. Over to you, Bram. I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, technology.
No worries, no worries. I think I just turned my camera off accidentally as well. No worries. Over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Good evening and good morning and good afternoon to people wherever they are. I am really grateful to be on your platform. I think there actually are some benefits of international solidarity. You get to meet people from all over the world and you get to share your experiences. And this is one of those times where we get to hear from each other and to share our experiences. For me, as a South African who was born in a family that fought against apartheid, I grew up knowing, without ever even understanding why, as a child, that we stood with the people of Palestine, we stood with the Cubans, we stood with the oppressed peoples of the world, because we were in a struggle. My godfather lost his hands in a letter bomb. I remember seeing this Anglican priest with hands as a familiar figure as a child, and then visiting him one day in hospital because he had a letter bomb and his hands had been blown off. And it was my childhood experiencing these kind of things. It really, we had our struggle in South Africa, and although not so many white people were involved in the struggle, they were there. And I was from one of those families that was involved. My father would hide people in our house, people that are quite well known in South Africa, like Chris Hani and many others used to come and hide in the house. And as kids at age 6, 7, we were not allowed to tell people that there were people in our house in case the apartheid police might find out and locate them. So, you know, I'm one of those who had a history rooted in struggle, and a history which greatly affected my outlook. But my history as a white South African in the struggle was therefore closer and more similar to the history of many, if not all, Black South Africans who had struggled during apartheid. So I guess I can completely relate to why the majority of South African people and the African National Congress, the ruling party, the party that Nelson Mandela was president of, I understand fully, and I completely support the consistent and very clear activism and support of the Palestinian people that South Africans share on a daily basis. It's really heartwarming to see that whenever there's anything particular that's happened in Palestine, anything particularly bad, it trends in South Africa very quickly on our social media, on Twitter and so on, because people in South Africa are really conscious and aware of what's happening in Palestine. Desmond Tutu once attended a big march we'd arranged and addressed it. And afterwards, he honestly said that this is the biggest march he'd been in. So the marches and the solidarity that South Africans have shown have been quite huge. But we do it because we feel we have a debt to pay back. I think we remember very clearly how. I remember when my uncle and my aunt were in jail for a couple of years. I remember very clearly appreciating the fact that there were these calls for action and there was this global solidarity. We were very familiar with how Reagan and Margaret Thatcher had participated in supporting our oppressors, and I held them as a child, as even a 6-year-old child, I held them responsible, the Americans, or that's how we saw it, responsible for the bomb that lost my godfather's eye and hands, and the methods used to kill many people who were family friends and people who I was familiar with. We went to, there were funerals and so on. So we were familiar with the struggle. But there's this solidarity, which I think is really motivated by a sense of indebtment, a sense of appreciation to the global community's role that they played in crippling the South African economy and forcing the oppressors to the bargaining table. And ultimately, it led to the democracy we enjoy today. Things are not perfect in South Africa, not by a long shot, but we truly do have a very, very vibrant democracy, and we do have a huge amount of freedoms. And I think it's fair to say that South Africa is a democratic country with problems, but we're free, and as a free country, able and willing to show its solidarity with Palestine. Our people voluntarily come in huge numbers to show their support for Palestine. This Palestinian solidarity is so popular in South Africa that I did actually visit Jerusalem, and I did go around the occupied territories and so on in Palestine. And there were many parts of Palestine and obviously the Israeli parts where you saw a lot less Palestinian flags than you saw in many parts we have in South Africa, many places. The Palestinian regalia has become so popular in South Africa that political parties and factions fighting to be popular try to adopt it in their campaigns. So we really have, I think, a very progressive position as a people. For us, there's a clear relationship, and I think another reason why it means so much to us to play a role in the resistance to the ongoing oppression that the Palestinians experience is because we can completely relate to the project of apartheid. We can completely relate to an oppressive state that comes and displaces an indigenous people and then declares that country their own. And a state that finds all sorts of mechanisms to justify having a different set of rules, a different set of human rights, a different set of privileges and suffering between the peoples. During apartheid, we had the Dom pass. It was the Dom pass is what they called it, which is in English it meant the stupid pass. And black South Africans had to walk with what was similar to a visa if they were to come to a white area, and they would have to justify that they were here to work to clean the white man's toilets in the suburbs or something, in order to be moving and to actually have the freedom of movement into those areas. That's very similar to what happens in Palestine, where Palestinians have a set of documentation, essentially visas that refuse them the right to move and to go particular places. And just like in apartheid, you have these police or military-styled characters who stop random people who appear to be Arab or appear to be Muslim or appear to be Palestinian, essentially, and randomly demanding documents and demanding a justification, a visa almost, for their right to be moving around in the country of their forefathers. We had that in South Africa. We saw South Africa come with all sorts of tricks to try justify it, including the Bantustans, where they tried to declare that certain bits of land in South Africa were independent republics, but of course not affording them the international status of a country, because they didn't want to give them the respect and give them the human rights or independence or autonomy that a country, a sovereign state would have. Exactly how the Israeli government is treating the Palestinian people, saying they're a different country, but then denying the country actually exists, demanding that they need certain visas or documentation to move into the various parts of the land that they've stolen. The endless harassment of the Palestinian people is very similar, and in actual fact worse and more sophisticated than what we experienced in South Africa. South Africa was under apartheid at a time where we cannot compare the technology. It hurts our heart, and we don't even know how to react to the kind of propaganda that the Israelis have. It's gone beyond Hollywood. It's now in TikTok. It's now they have a deliberate effort to try put lipstick on the pig of their regime, the revolting, oppressive Israeli regime. In South Africa, we had a different environment. People would sing "Kill the Boer," which was similar to saying "Kill the whites," essentially, and it was tolerated because it was understood that black people were fighting for their freedom. In the Palestinian-Israeli issue, the moment you indicate or say anything that could be perceived as insulting towards the oppressor or their ethnicity, you're now the perpetrator and they are now the victim. The red herring of anti-Semitism is constantly used to justify the silencing of the Palestinian people. If a movie like this recent movie on Netflix comes out on the Nakba, it's anti-Semitic. There's this cancel culture from the very Israeli state, which claims that boycotts or sanctions or various methods of solidarity are fruitless and are ineffective and are problematic and should be considered terrorism. There's no integrity in the Israeli oppression of the Palestinian people. There's less honesty than what even the apartheid government did to our black South Africans. At least black South Africans were able to say, hey, you whites, you're killing us. It's not okay. Not that every white person, I'm white, not that every white person was an oppressor, but they didn't need to be politically correct in responding to the person with a baton or a bullet shooting at them. The Palestinian people almost have to be apologetic in their resistance. The peoples of South Africa and the world, we see these violations, and we're willing and continue to be committed in every which way we're able to, at least from Afro-Palestine side and many South Africans, to support the Palestinian people by protesting, by showing solidarity, and supporting whatever we can to do. It's difficult because, outside of calling for boycotts and sanctions and these kind of platforms which we're on now, where we project our voices to let the Palestinian people know that we are aware and we do support them, we care about them, we love them. And I think that we'll do everything we can. And it's quite frustrating because many of us have done many things to support the Palestinian people. I got beaten up quite badly for throwing marbles in an ice hockey game between Israel and South Africa on the ice skating rink here. We're really willing to do a lot of things to show and even put ourselves in danger if need be to support the Palestinian people. But the oppression of the Palestinian people by Israel is so sophisticated, so intense, and so difficult for us to do more than what we're doing. But we're committed and we'll continue to do so. And we do so because we've seen it before. And South Africans in the struggle, black South Africans in particular, for a very long time, didn't believe that the day of freedom would arrive, and it did. And we're hopeful that the Palestinian people will get their freedom and their rights and their dignity in our lifetimes. And if not, we will hand the baton of solidarity to our children, the next generation, and so on. We'll not get tired in our solidarity for the Palestinian people, because how dare we get tired when the Palestinians every day are being harassed at checkpoints just to go to work and back, to go to the shops. They're being abused and murdered by children, these Israeli teenagers who are given guns to oppress elderly women. So we pledge our solidarity, and we continue to support Palestine because we see in Palestine the pain and suffering that we had experienced when we were in the struggle. Thank you very much.
Oh, I did it myself there with the mute. Thank you very much, Bram, for your passionate and informative and really well put contribution. I think it's so important that we do talk about the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, and this is included in the discourse on Palestine right now more than ever, especially concerning Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, and Amnesty International's recent reports on Israeli apartheid. Thank you again, Bram. Our next speaker and our final speaker of today's panel discussion is Bernard Regan. Bernard is speaking on behalf of the UK's Cuba Solidarity Campaign. He is the current secretary of the campaign and has led trade union delegations to Cuba. He is a trustee of the National Education Union and is the author of the Balfour Declaration, Empire, the Mandate and Resistance in Palestine, published in 2018. Over to you, Bernard.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to join this distinguished panel. It's an honor to be with the comrades who are speaking this evening. I want to say something about the history of Cuba's position in relation to Palestine, something about the current context, and then perhaps conclude with some comments about the struggle going forward. In regard to the history of Cuba's attitude towards Palestine, it's interesting to note that actually Cuba was one of the few countries which in 1947 voted against the proposal at the United Nations General Assembly to support the creation of the State of Israel. That was even before the revolution. Dr. Ernesto de Higo, who was the Cuban representative at the United Nations, said that the Balfour Declaration, in our opinion, that is in the opinion of the Cubans, the Balfour Declaration, in our opinion, is completely without legal value since the British government offered it in it something that it had no right to dispose of because it was not its own. So Cuba's position with regard to the establishment of the State of Israel and what happened at the Nakba in 1948 was very clear from the outset. When the Cuban Revolution happened in January 1959, it was within a matter of months that actually Cuba sent representatives to visit Palestine. Che Guevara, on a tour of 14 different countries across Africa and Asia, visited Gaza in June of 1959, together with Raul Castro, and they visited the Al Barouj refugee camp in Gaza to express their clear solidarity with the Palestinian people. And that solidarity was reaffirmed on many occasions at the United Nations General Assembly on the 14th of December in 1964. Che Guevara made a powerful speech in which he held the responsibility for the impoverishment, the maintenance of neocolonialism, the assaults on the health and well-being of people across the globe. He held that responsibility clearly on the shoulders of the imperialists and singled out the United States of America as the principal imperial agent responsible for conducting that. And during the course of that speech, he declared his solidarity with struggles that were taking place across the globe, including the struggle of the Palestinian people. So it was there in the minds of the Palestinian representatives from the outset. Similarly, at the Tricontinental Conference, which took place in Havana in 1967, which was attended by over 500 delegates from 82 countries, again, he reaffirmed that commitment. At the time, of course, one of the most prominent anti-imperialist struggles that was taking place was that of the people of Vietnam, conducting a heroic struggle, having defeated French imperialism, then confronted the United States of America and its mass ranks. And Che called for solidarity across the globe with the people of Vietnam, calling for the creation of one too many Vietnams. In other words, what he was saying was that those people in the oppressed and neo-colonial world were actually in the same trench as the people of Vietnam and should engage in a fight in order to alleviate their suffering and the hardships that they faced in the context of that struggle against the United States. And similarly, in 1979, again, in September of 1979, at the movement of non-aligned countries, speaking of Palestine, Fidel Castro said, "There is no more brutal dispossession of the rights of peace to peace and existence of a people that has been committed in this century." And he was referring to the struggle of the Palestinian people and making that very clear where he stood in relation to that. So the Cubans made a serious effort to bring together the anti-imperialist struggles in order to make connections and build solidarity. At the Tricontinental Conference that I mentioned, for example, that took place in Havana in 1967, there were many leaders of struggles that were taking place across the globe, including people like Amilcar Cabral, the famous African revolutionary, Salvador Allende, and many others across the globe who were taking part in that. Shortly after that, in 1971, Yasser Arafat was interviewed for the Tricontinental magazine, the magazine that brought together contributions from people across the globe engaged in anti-imperialist and anti-colonial struggles. And Yasser Arafat said at that time, "We have great confidence in our Cuban friends. We know that they are very close to our cause. Support is something very important for the kind of struggle we are carrying on. We look firmly towards the Cuban Revolution. To the peoples of Latin America, I can say that we are in the same trench. We are in the same trench and in the same battle, and we want to increase our cooperation and unity, coming closer to each other. There is in no sense distance. Inside, we are very close to each other. So there was an understanding at that time that the struggle that the Palestinians were engaged in had similarities to the struggles that were taking place across Latin America against United States imperialism. Cuba, as you know, has suffered more than 60 years of blockade, an absolutely horrendous blockade, which perhaps is one of the worst blockades in history. It's one which is absolutely vicious, robbing the Cuban economy, depriving the Cuban people of essential goods that they are forced to look for far and wide, and increases the cost in terms of the economy in Cuba, and a difficulty which they face continuously. In the United Nations, for the last 30 years, there has been an overwhelming majority of countries which have supported them in opposing that blockade. And it's interesting that the only two countries that vote for the continuance of it are the United States of America itself and Israel. And I think that is a very significant feature, if you like, of what we can understand about the politics of Israel and where it stands in relation to the world. Of course, Israel is the recipient of 3.8 billion worth of arms from the United States of America every year, a colossal subvention in terms of its role within that area. When Donald Trump left the presidency and Joe Biden took over, it was anticipated there might be some change in the attitude towards Cuba and perhaps some change in the attitude towards Palestine. But we've seen nothing of that in the case of the attitude towards Cuba. In 2017, Donald Trump, when he appeared at the United Nations General Assembly, speaking about, the great and the good things that the United States was going to carry out, he reaffirmed the Monroe Doctrine of 1821. The Monroe Doctrine was a commitment of policy by the United States of America, which said that basically the United States of America took to itself the rights to determine whatever happened in the whole of the Western Hemisphere. It was couched in terms of opposition to European imperialism, but actually it was a clear statement of American imperialism and America's feeling that they have a right to define and determine what happens across the whole of the Western Hemisphere. And I have to say that in some respects, I believe that the Abraham Accords, which Israel has been signing with the UAE, with Bahrain, and with other countries, is in some respects the Monroe Doctrine of the Middle East, because it's an affirmation that the United States of America will brook no challenge to its authority. In other words, it's a threat not only to the Palestinian people, but in my view, to the whole of the peoples of the Arab worlds across the whole of the Middle East region, and something that should be opposed strongly. Cuba has given and has been clear in its record of support in the struggle against imperialism. That was no more evident than its stance that it took in solidarity with the people of Angola, defending Angola against the incursions and invasions of the South African Defence Force. And it was for that very reason that Nelson Mandela, in his first foreign visit that he went after being released from jail, went to Cuba to thank the Cuban people for the sacrifices that they had made when they had moved to defend and support the Angolan peoples and the Southwest African People's Organization against the attacks of the South African military. A courageous struggle in which many Cubans lost their lives, but nevertheless defeated the South African Defense Force at Quito Carnevale. And as a result, Nelson Mandela said, helped to bring down apartheid and to destroy it. There is no greater show, I don't believe, of any case of international solidarity that is greater than the Cubans' actions that they took in Africa. And Cuba continues to give solidarity to the peoples of Africa, indeed to the peoples across the world, with its support that is given for medical support to countries which don't have access or easy access to medical facilities, to train doctors, to train medics. Its intervention in West Africa was signally important in helping to prevent the spread of the Ebola virus. In recent years, it's sent medics across the globe to help fight against COVID and to prevent the spread of that in 4 continents of the world, something not equaled by any other country in terms of its internationalism and its stand. Cuba's record, I think, is unblemished in terms of its internationalism and its support for the Palestinian people. A friend of mine in Havana emailed me when I told him about this meeting tonight, and I hope he's going to watch it at some stage, telling me that he has in his class at the Medical University in Havana students from Palestine. There are 300 Palestinian students today studying in Cuba because, as they wrote and expressed to me, they are not able to do that easily in a situation of occupation, in a situation of checkpoints, in a situation of oppression by the Israeli army, and in a situation where the cost of doing so is astronomical and they come from families who can't afford that. So Cuba is giving practical aid and practical solidarity to the people of Palestine. In the recent months and recent days, Cuba has voted alongside many other countries in support of a proposal that came before the United Nations General Assembly, saying that next year, which is the 75th anniversary of the Nakba, should be commemorated by an event inside the General Assembly itself. Of course, this proposal was disgracefully opposed by the United States of America. Unsurprisingly, it was opposed by Israel. It was also opposed by the United Kingdom, by Australia, and numerous other countries. But Palestine is something which Cuba will stand firm and has stood firm on in terms of its support for the Palestinian people. I think the recent reports have been referred to by earlier contributors to the fact that the racist nature of the oppression that is taking place against the Palestinian is now becoming exposed by various internationally respected NGOs, but also it was included in the report of the Special Rapporteur on human rights in Palestine and the occupied territories. And he made clear and refers several times in the document he produced in August of this year to the fact that what is happening there is akin to apartheid. So I think it's important for us to actually get that message out, to spread that widely. And I think we should be heartened by the fact that even in the height of the apartheid era in South Africa, when the President of the United States of America, Ronald Reagan, was really tacitly giving support to the South African regime, that actually Congress voted to impose sanctions on the South African apartheid government. And the same happened here in Britain. Although Thatcher was in power in Britain, nevertheless, the mass of people in Britain supported the struggle against apartheid. So I think we should take heart from that. We should make that and talk about that loud and clear and often and loudly, as I've said. One of the things, and it may seem a frivolous comment, but it isn't intended as such, one of the things that I think is really heartening is at the World Cup, which is taking place, the football soccer World Cup, you're actually seeing Palestinian flags across the stadia being waved and Palestinians being saluted in the course of that. I think there is immense solidarity for the Palestinian people. We have to mobilize it. We have to change the attitude of governments, and we have to get a mass movement internationally that can build solidarity with the Palestinian people and obtain justice for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernard, for your contribution. And just to emphasize one point that you mentioned, it's very telling, the annual vote that the United Nations hosts, where all kind of countries who are member states of the United Nations vote to end the US's brutal blockade of Cuba, that every single year for 30 years, the only 2 countries consistently voting to sustain that brutal blockade are both America and Israel, both countries that are upholding brutal blockades themselves. And even talking specifically in terms of Palestinian resistance, Cuba has always been incredibly supportive of Palestinian resistance groups such as the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I believe Fidel Castro himself invited the PFLP to Cuba and armed and trained them. So we have a few minutes left for some questions from the online audience on both Facebook and YouTube to get an answer from our speakers. The first question is from Hella. Hella asks, I think this question's for everyone. Are those in leadership positions from the Palestinian Authority to the ANC, to those in Stormont, to those Democrats in the US, are they letting your causes down, or how are they hindering your causes? I think I'll just open that up to everyone.
If I may, but before I answer that, I just want to go back to the last thing that Bernard mentioned, because I think it's far from frivolous. What we're seeing at the World Cup is people feel they don't have to break a fear barrier to speak their conscience. That's the only thing. And when that happens, I do think the majority of people are supporting Palestine because you have eyes, you can see. Israel spends millions of dollars on its propaganda, but it's not actually very strong propaganda. A couple of videos from a Palestinian journalist or activist on TikTok or Instagram, puts holes right through all of their arguments. So I think it is an issue of people are afraid to speak their conscience and follow their conscience. And we have to break that fear barrier, and people have to follow the example of Palestinians in Palestine. Trust me, the fear barrier they're breaking is much greater than any fear barrier you're breaking in Canada or the US on this issue. So if they can do it, people all over the world ought to as well. And in terms of that question, so you have to take it differently for different leaderships. So in terms of American leadership, Canadian leadership, or whatever, a UK leadership, they're not on our side. They have to be pressured. So they're not letting us down. They're doing exactly what they want to do. They know what's going on. They don't need. Honestly, it's not a question of knowledge for politicians. They know exactly what's happening. Most of them will tell you that they know what's happening after they retire from politics. But so they know what's going on, and they're making their decisions based on what they know. So they're not on our side, but people just need to pressure them. They can be switched. It depends on the context. I think in a place like Canada, people just have to put pressure on them and tell them that they have to take different policy positions on Palestine. And there are certain politicians that are more winnable than others. But yeah, so it depends on which political party you're talking about as well. In terms of the Palestinian Authority, look, it's no secret that the Palestinian Street has been telling us for decades that the Palestinian Authority is part of the problem. This isn't to paint a large brush over every single person within the Palestinian Authority. There are, of course, good people working within that structure. But the structure itself of the Palestinian Authority was designed and approved by Israel. And it was designed and approved by Israel as a way to create a native structure to rule the natives. It's an old colonial tactic. It's been used across the history of colonialism, and it is by its very nature the Palestinian Authority structure to serve Israel's settler colonial project. So it's a different conversation when it comes to them. But I place your support in the Palestinian Street, in grassroots movements. The Palestine Solidarity Movement, the global movement for Palestine, is a grassroots movement by necessity, and I think though it's better for it that way, because my faith is always in people power. So maintain your solidarities with the grassroots in Palestine. Follow their lead on some of these issues in terms of strategies and movements forward. Follow the call for BDS. And support Palestinian freedom on that level of the grassroots.
Yeah.
If we could just get perhaps Bernadette to jump in there. Yeah. I've just seen today that the Irish Language Act has passed through. Just to further onto the question and to link those.
Yeah. Well, again, picking up on where Mark is, I think I'll start at the end with the question of the Palestinian Authority. Yes, quite right. You know, the Stormont administration, the power sharing government that we had at the end of the war, that's now part of the peace, is a structure that is meant to contain the situation within the limits of those who already hold power. And they create, those structures create internal problems. But fundamentally, in terms of the international solidarity movement, the detail of those problems are not ours. They are within the Palestinian Palestinian people within Palestine to argue and to change and to do what needs to be done. I think our issue as supporters and allies is, as an old comrade in the Irish struggle living in America said all the time, our purpose is to be sound on the fundamentals and to ensure that we do not deviate from those fundamentals. The right of the Palestinians to their own land, the right of the Palestinians to return. There is no wavering, no negotiation, no diluting of that to hear both sides. That is the fundamental position, and it's how we get to there, and then how we accommodate and sort out people who somehow think it belongs to them, and by stealing it, they can keep it. I go back to the old paternal father of modern democracy, who said a usurpation of a right will remain a usurpation until it is ended. No length of time, no benevolence, no dilution alters a usurpation to be anything other than it is. So we in Ireland have a right to our language. Nobody has a right to say it's too long, it's gone. The First Nation and Native American people and Indigenous people have a right to their lands and their language. Wherever we are, there are fundamentals that are not ours to alter on behalf of the individual communities who fight their own battle. Our own political leaders, are our own political institutions part of the problem? Of course they are, but the strength is in civic society. The strength is in mass movement. The strength is in economic boycott. And the authority of individual governments is, sadly for democracy, greatly overrated at this point. The name of the game in the middle of this century is an economic battle, boycotting, making it impossible for Israel to trade freely without being shamed. And small things matter. Small acts of disruption where you can, little children of 10-year-old can walk around stores and put stickers on Israeli oranges that say Free Palestine, so that everybody who picks one up looking for the price sees Free Palestine, don't buy this. And they might just put it down. From those small actions to meetings like this, and to always calling it out, no matter how that heartless machine of propaganda keeps churning out the same robotic justifications of inhumanity, to challenge it. Like any other racism, we may not be able to say we can stop it today, but we should be able to say at the end of every day that it did not pass your eyes unchallenged. And if we all did that at a personal level and collectively organized, I agree, it's in mass movement, in political movement, in mass action, in boycotts, in campaigning and lobbying for disinvestment, because those who have no principles have interests, and we should lobby and pressurize them, and we can win, and we will win. Sometimes we think that it is, if it doesn't happen immediately, we should give up. The people we enjoy what we have today because the people before us didn't give up. And sometimes we forget that, and it is our duty. And I think Bernard said that, if not in our lifetime. And when I was 21, I was dead sure in my lifetime everything would happen. I am now dead sure that at least I have sown the seeds of freedom in my daughters and my sons, in my children, my grandchildren, in my friends and my neighbours and my allies. And if not in my lifetime, in the lifetime of those who come after me, Palestine will be free. And the state of Israel will either live within the confines of human decency, or it will not exist.
Just wanted to pass the question on to Rebecca there. I think I saw you wanted to perhaps answer the question earlier, but I think you're on mute.
Oh, yes. Sorry, thank you. It's kind of the broader question of how basically our own people in power, how they may have impacted our own struggles or our battles for freedom or land back or language. And surprisingly, I mean, politics is politics, and it's mentioned what's happening in Israel. I've spent over 20 years fighting for the rights of our fisheries, and there are 8 actual dams that our salmon have to come back through, all the way to the mountains where they're born in here on our reservation. They have to travel that far down from up the Columbia River and up the Snake. And there's these 4 deadbeat dams on the Snake River that provide no power. They were run of the river dams. They were meant for transportation. That's been moved to rail. So it's like, why do we still have these dams? Why can't a river actually run like a river? And surprisingly, you'd think that during the time when Barack Obama was in office, we thought we had victory on our hands. And actually what he did was scratch out Bush's name on the biological opinion and put his own name on it. Didn't change anything about the biological opinion. A few years later, Judge Redden in federal court struck down that opinion and stated it violated the Endangered Species Act. So politics is really quite a strange thing. And you'd be surprised where you have victories and where you don't. It doesn't always happen in a democratic administration. Probably one of the greatest acts that could happen for Indigenous people was during Richard Nixon's administration in the 70s, and that was the Self-Determination Act. And that allowed tribes to be able to determine our own future and not be subject to just kind of this federal system of managing Indians, so to speak. And so, what happens when a administration takes over, you have these regions in the United States that don't change. You have, career execs that are in that system of the federal government that stay in that system. And so a lot of times, you know, unless it's this huge issue like healthcare or something like that, it doesn't really get the attention that you want it to get, that it right to the. So unfortunately, we have been impacted negatively by each administration, and it sometimes always just depends on, you know, how savvy your government is, our tribal government, in being able to manage. You think about in 40, 50 years of federal government, it's more than quadrupled in size. And you think about how that is for a tribal leader to manage through and be able to go back to Congress and go back to the administration and get a few minutes of their attention. And so I'll just leave it at that to just kind of just explain the difficulty of some of our battles we've had to face. And what I mentioned before, the fatigue of constantly going through those systems just to be heard for a couple minutes. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Rebecca. Bernard, do you want to jump in on this question?
Just a couple of things. I mean, one is I agree very much with Bernadette. It's not the place of the international solidarity movement to try and tell the Palestinian people or the Palestinian leadership what to do. It's their right. If you support the right of self-determination, that is what you're supporting, the right of the peoples to determine what should happen, not to either second guess or to think that you're wiser. You know, we have a debate occasionally amongst people about whether there should be a one state or whether there should be two states, but it's not our business as a solidarity movement. If you're in solidarity with people, that's what you're doing. You're supporting their right to conduct the struggle as they see fit. And I have absolute confidence in the wisdom of the Palestinian people to make the choices that are right for them. I just think it's important for people to understand that. Second thing is, I think it's important. I think it is very good that there is a real diversification of different kinds of solidarity activity amongst artists, amongst people doing bike rides, and amongst families, amongst church communities. I think that's wonderful, and I think that should be encouraged. At the same time, I hope also we encourage the building of unity so that we create real mass movements in our country that can affect change. Change such as, for example, the involvement of trade unionists in refusing to load ships with arms that are being taken to Israel, or to unload them if they're being delivered from Israel. Actions that can give real meaningful solidarity in the course of the struggle. And I'm I think like Bernadette, I'm very optimistic about people. I think people's innate goodness and good sense and solidarity and consciousness about the injustice, I think will win the majority of people to the cause for Palestine. In Britain, we've seen a series of cases of people being accused of anti-Semitism. And in some cases, tragically, it's true, they are anti-Semitic, and we have absolutely nothing to do with people of that kind. But I think the real fear that Israel has is not those crude Holocaust-denying anti-Semites. The real fear that Israel has is of people telling the truth, simply saying what is happening. Do you think this is just? Do you think this is a way people should be treated? Do you think this is the way in which people should live? And when people hear that case, that is what I think is the most challenging thing to Israel, and which really, gives them fear in terms of their loss of credibility and undermining their false claims to be a democratic state, and so on and so forth. So, I'm very optimistic about the possibilities of going even further. We haven't really even begun to, I think, really engage with the massive forces that are potentially mobilizable in support of Palestine. So, I hope that we can make a small contribution through this meeting, and hopefully continuing to retain contact with each other, that we can build that for the future.
Here.
Thank you. And just to add on to Rebecca's earlier TV series recommendation. So that was The English on, I believe you can find it on Amazon Prime. And also, I just wanted to add as well, for another recommendation to watch on Netflix is a film called Farha, spelled Farha. We know we've seen recently Israeli government officials actually threatening Netflix into taking this film down. It's a film that depicts the true life testimony of a Nakba survivor and the horrors of the Nakba. And I believe it's one of the first times a film like this has been on such a public streaming platform. So unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. I just wanted to thank all of our insightful and inspirational speakers for their time this evening and morning. Rebecca, thank you, Mark, Bernadette, Rebecca, Bram, and Bernard. Today's event is just the second event of Return Week. Be sure to tune in to the rest of the week's events. It's the same time, the same place. And there are 3 more incredible panels not to be missed. Tomorrow's event is entitled Stop the JNF, 120 Years of Colonization, where we'll be speaking to local JNF groups from South Africa to the UK on their work on the ground in stopping the Jewish National Fund and their colonization of Palestine and their greenwashing. And it will be streamed live here on the Palestinian Return Center's YouTube and Facebook from 7 p.m. GMT for the rest of the week. Thank you again for everyone tuning in, and hope you can join us for the rest of Return Week. Thank you.